Welcome to another episode of Tech Society. For all your tech and business analysis and other important topics that revolve around technology and modern society. Hosted by tech entrepreneurs and whiskey enthusiasts, John Newen and Alex Dunmo.
Hey techies, welcome to another episode of Tech Society. Today we are speaking with Tim Duggan, co-founder and previous editor-at-large of Junkee Media. Tim talks with us about his book, Cult Status, How to Build a Business People Adore, and shares with us the hard lessons he's learned along his business journey. Currently touring Australia with his husband, Tim comes to us live from his camper van in rural Victoria. Tim explains in great detail exactly why it is so important that a business or project has a passionate community around it.
I am Tim Duggan. I am the co-founder and currently editor-at-large of Junkee Media. So we are a media company that produces content primarily for millennials. I co-founded the company many years ago, and after about 15 years of doing it, we'd built the company up to about 60, 70 staff. We sold it to a bigger media company, and I decided I wanted to get what was inside my head down onto paper. And so I wrote my first book, which came out this year, called Cult Status. And that's been a hell of a lot of fun to kind of sit and talk to people about some of the ideas that are inside the book. And currently I'm sitting in a camper van in the northwest corner of Victoria in the Grampians. And yeah, life's pretty good. I've finished up at Junkee full time, and I'm now traveling around the camper van for as long as I can until I get bored. But my husband and I, we're working 2 days a week while we're on the road, which is quite nice. We kind of feel like we've flipped the traditional week. Instead of working 5 days a week and having 2 days off, we're kind of working 2 days a week and having 5 days off.
Do weekends have no meaning for you now?
I have no idea what day it is.
Nice.
I have no idea if it's... The only reason I know it's a weekend is because things get busier around me. So we'll turn up somewhere and it's like, gosh, what day is it today? And it's a Saturday and you see kids out. So that's a nice phase of life to be in, to be honest. So I traveled the world and I went over to Silicon Valley and lots of time on the phone to London and down to Melbourne, and spending time with about 50 different entrepreneurs who all were roughly millennial entrepreneurs. They all were thinking about business in a new way, and they were all building these businesses that had really passionate communities around them. And I wanted to understand how they'd built those communities. So kind of spent lots of time and then essentially put their learnings down into 7 steps to building a business with Cult Status, which is kind of the crux of the book. There's a lot of other people's learnings in there. So some of it's my story of kind of starting, co-founding Junkee and starting my first website, which was a national gay and lesbian title when I was 24 years old. So there's a bit of my story in there, but I didn't just want it to be about me because that would be a bit boring and a bit self-indulgent. So instead, I spoke to people like the founder of Tom's Shoes, called Blake Mycoskie, and one of the co-founders of Nest that got sold to Google for $3 billion. And I went and spent some time with him in San Francisco. And Allbirds, a shoe company started by the New Zealand ex-vice captain of the New Zealand soccer team, started a shoe company called Allbirds that's huge in the US. And so, yeah, I really wanted to just understand lots of different people's experience and then try and kind of distill it all down into what everyone had in common, including myself and other people. So we've spent part of our business that we had was Junkee Media was a media title of our media brands. And then the other side, we had a business called Junkee Studio, where we created social content for brands. And in the end, our biggest client was Netflix, where we were creating all of the social content for all of Netflix's social channels in Australia and New Zealand, and Qantas and American Express. And working with some of those brands, it's quite fascinating. They've all got very different but successful ways of working. So something like Qantas is, really has their brand at the core of what they do as one of Australia's most loved brands. American Express kind of had that trust and authority to it. And then Netflix just had this throw out all of the rules and let's rewrite everything every week. I mean, that was really fascinating to work with a company like that.
Can I ask quickly, how did you land that business with Netflix? That was really cool.
Yeah, it was a really big, exciting get for us. And it was through an open pitch. So it was kind of a pitch through all of some of Australia's best kind of content and social agencies. And we had a pitch, and part of the reason that we really work with some of these brands is because the way that we like to think about publishing content to young Australians was that we viewed almost every piece of content we published as a little mini experiment. And so we published 1,000, 2,000 pieces of content every month. And we really tried to extract out of that using data analytics, using business intelligence, what was that saying about the state of algorithms at the moment, about what people were into, around what content was resonating. And we took all of that like really interesting juice that we got from those pieces of experiments, publishing content. And then we took it to brands like Netflix and Qantas and American Express. And we said, rather than just talking about what we can do for you, we're living it out, and we're kind of viewing each of our brands as an experiment on social, which kind of gave us real-time data and real-time feedback into what worked. And so that was really important when we won the Netflix pitch. It was really what we can offer as a publisher is actually quite unique compared to most other social agencies.
Can I ask, what's with the focus on millennials? And that's cool because, we're millennials, but what about the next generations, Gen Z, all that kind of stuff? Is it just to focus on younger people, or is it millennials in particular?
Do you know that it actually just started because myself and my business partner were millennials? And that is just, we started creating content for ourselves before we were even called millennials. I just turned 40. I consider myself the world's oldest living millennial.
I think that's the cutoff, right? It's
that's right at the edge.
40 this year,
yeah. So I was born at the end of 1980, which is, there's a gazillion definitions of it, but I'm clinging on to that, so let me have that. So really it started when we first started doing it. We created content it was 18 to 24-year-olds because we were kind of 18 to 24. And then as we grew up, it was content for 18 to 29-year-olds. Then it was 18 to 35-year-olds. Then it was millennials. And interestingly, the bigger we got and the further we went along, we kept on having to hire younger people to kind of keep us cool and to tell us what was going on with that generation. So by the end, we ended up launching a new title called Punky, which is kind of Junkee's cheeky younger sister. And that was aimed at Gen Z. And we hired a lot of Gen Z staff to kind of just tell us what was going on. And I tell you what, by the end of it, I didn't understand half of the stuff that, the memes that they're publishing and what they're talking about, but it worked. And, I'm, as a now new 40-year-old, I'm not the audience for someone who's 16 to 24.
I was going to ask, did you have that moment where just get off my porch? Yeah, get off my grass.
It happened on a really regular basis. And, there comes a time when you realize you're no longer the target market, and that's fine. Like I as I said, this company, kind of the content that we started creating was for ourselves, and it just kind of aged as we did. But if we wanted to stay relevant as a company that publishes content for Australian youth, we need to hire a lot of young people. And of course it was going to go over my head. It was almost like proof point that it was for a Gen Z if I didn't really understand what was going on.
So if you understood, you're like, go back and rethink.
Yeah, if I understood, it's like, guys, that's for older millennials. That's for the world's oldest living millennial.
When you talk to the people to write the book, did you find that they had purposely set out to build communities around their business, or was it something that they instinctively knew?
Yeah, it was probably a mixture of both. I would say the newer companies, so the younger ones that had been around just for a couple of years, had probably purposely set out to do it. And that's, I think, because of the rise of, what's your purpose as a company and who's your audience? That's a quite relatively new phenomenon. And I look at, myself and my business partners, when we started most of our websites, we didn't think of what's the higher purpose to what we're doing, or how do you build a community? We just thought that there was a need for it, and so went out to build it. So a lot of the older companies, older in this case is probably 10 years old, I think they tried to solve a problem, or they went out because they had a unique way of viewing the world or a unique service. And then a lot of them have kind of post-rationalized the community part to that, or seen that a community started to build around their products, and then have, then hired a community manager and then figured out how they can really kind of amplify that part of their business. So yeah, it's a real combination of both. But interestingly, I'm finding now, and ever since the book came out a few months ago, a lot of people talking to me about their ideas and their businesses, and a lot of people now are building it with the community at the center and thinking of that first before they're doing anything else. And that's kind of the right way of doing it, I think, rather than thinking about it later.
That's interesting. You say you think that's the right way to go about it. Do you think that kind of excludes people who maybe don't function that way? They find building a community a challenge, even though they have a great product or a great service or even a great message, but actually building that community takes a certain mindset?
It really does. And so my book's called Cult Status. And essentially my simple definition of cult status is a business that has a strong community around it that identify with the purpose of that business. And that's not every business. So not every business can have cult status. Not every business should have cult status. Not every business wants to have cult status. So I do think that if you can clearly articulate why you're doing what you're doing, and you uncover a group of people who also believe in that why, then a community will build around something naturally. And so sometimes you don't even need to kind of go out there and have a community manager and say, I want to build a strong community. It just kind of like naturally forms around what you're doing because other people subconsciously see what you're doing and like it and want to be a part of it.
What about B2B? Do you think it still applies there, or can still apply there, or is it just strictly B2C?
No, I definitely think it still applies in B2B, particularly kind of professional services. I think is a really interesting place where there can be a passionate community, because I think if you think of B2C, you're probably thinking of like big communities. So it might be, our customer base is unlimited, or our customer base is 100,000 people or 10,000 people. Whereas you think in B2C, sometimes it's 10 people, it's 100 people as your clients or customers, and you can still have a strong community with a small number of people. So it's not the size of your community that is important. I think it's the strength of how passionate, their love for what you do is. So I think in the B2C community, it's just thinking about it in a different way and not thinking about it in terms of size and scale and getting 100,000 customers. It's like, okay, of the 100 people who really love what we do, how can I fortify my relationship with them? And interestingly, I've had a lot of feedback since the book was published from accountants and from people who work in finance who have seen some of the principles in the book and they've applied it to what they're doing. Like a really simple example of that is one of the steps in the book is about defining your altar. So if you want to have a business that has cult status, you kind of need to give people generally a physical or sometimes an online place for everyone who really likes it to come together to kind of worship at the altar of that product or service. And for professional services, that's probably someone's office. So if you're an accountant, your altar where people are going to kind of come together is when they come into your office to see you. So if you think of it more like that, what is a unique ritual or unique language that you have that you can kind of really make it seem, unique and make people who come there feel like they're part of your community or you're part of your clan. So that's a really interesting way of approaching it.
That's fascinating. I think we actually do that without doing it on purpose.
We just try to make the workplace fun, and it becomes kind of cultish.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think one of the things when I was writing the book was I was the same way. I've kind of tried to go back and think through things that we used to do as a company that are unique to your company. And every company has them. So whether it's like the way that you celebrate wins, or whether it's how you do birthdays, or a greeting when someone comes into the door, or, something like that. Every company has things that are unique to them. And I think part of creating a cult status is trying to listen to what those things are and lean into them. So if, turn it into an actual ritual that kind of becomes part of your folklore, either for your customers or for your staff. And then you can kind of start building almost like a Bible that has I'm using lots of religious terms here because cult status and worship and Bible and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about it in that similar way, it's actually a really neat way of just making sure that the rituals don't happen accidentally. They happen with intent.
Was that worth a workshopping session, I wonder?
Totally. Yeah. And I think the best rituals are ones that aren't forced. So they're ones that you're already doing. And often there's two parts of defining your altar. It's knowing what those rituals are, and also having a unique language that's unique to you. So it could be what you call your customers, or what you call your staff, or if there's a certain day that only your company does that other people don't. So I think kind of figuring out what's that language that's unique to you. And some of the best examples of kind of, brands with cult status have really honed those rituals, or really kind of have the language around how you feel when you're kind of part of that community.
On the topic of writing books, you wrote in your notes here that you read a book called The Miracle Morning. It suggested that you wake up at 4 a.m. to get things done. Can you talk more on that?
Yeah. Have you guys heard of the book before?
I haven't, no.
Not until we read your notes.
Yeah, until now.
Yeah, nice. It's like a little bit self-helpy, a little bit new age, but I freaking love it. So it's called Miracle Morning, and it's all about how you can turn your time in the morning into proactive time rather than reactive time. So instead of kind of like slowly waking up and like checking your phone and then, rolling over and, getting up and then having a cup of coffee and kind of doing that, it's like, okay, how can you turn that time in the morning into kind of a ritual in a way? So it's called Miracle Morning, and it's all about actively doing things in the morning. So there's like a acronym called SAVING, which stands for like silence, which is kind of like meditation. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. Like silence, which is like meditation, and doing journaling, doing affirmations, which I find a little bit too self-helpy. I actually dropped the affirmations part. Doing exercise. And I started doing this about 3 years ago. I was always kind of like an early-ish riser, like 6. And then I started doing it and started going to 5, and then started going to like 4. And then all of a sudden I was up and active in the morning. I had all of this time. And so I was like, what can I do with this time? And I started writing my book. And so my first book, Cult Status, was literally written from like 4 till 6 a.m. every morning before work for about a year or two. And so I kind of credit that with almost being the thing that helped me write my first book.
You mentioned the camper van and sleeping early because, the sun goes down. What is your day-to-day like now? Like, is it because you moved away from operations, surely? So what do? You have lots of free time,
So I finished up at Junkee full-time in early October this year. So for the past 2 months, I have been flipping. I like to think of it as flipping my life, in terms of, instead of working 5 days a week and then having 2 days off, when we travel around, my husband and I put aside every Monday and Tuesday, and we check into a hotel or an Airbnb with a good internet for a couple of days. And then we have 5 days to kind of explore. So we're just kind of doing lots of hiking. We are going, and just, if the weather looks good somewhere, we're going to the coast. If it looks like it's going to rain, we're going inland. I just came from a place called Mungo National Park, which is in the northwest corner of New South Wales, which is the most extraordinary national park I've ever been to. And it's where they discovered the remains of Mungo Lady and Mungo Man, which were 40,000-year-old human remains, which kind of changed the way historians view Indigenous Australians, how long they've been here. And also it's the oldest cremated remains in the world, and the oldest remains outside of Africa that have been found. And that's like in like a corner of New South Wales that like no one has heard of. Well, not many people have heard of. I'd never heard of it. I'd never been there because I'd always been lured to go overseas. So it's quite exciting just to be able to drive for 6 hours and stay in somewhere and just explore. Yeah. That's like the day-to-day at the moment.
Just to jump back to your career, I read your half-time lessons, 23 things I've learned in the first half of my career. And don't worry, we won't go through each one by one. But you said something that I found really interesting. You said it's easier to start something when you don't know anything. What did you mean by that?
There's a real power in naivety that I think is misunderstood. And you only really see that when you look back at it. So naivety is one of these things where you no one thinks they're naive. You think you kind of know, well, you don't think you know everything, but you think you know enough to start things. And it's only with the benefit of hindsight, like 5 years later, 10 years later, that you look back at something, you're like, oh my God, I knew nothing back then. If only I knew what I knew today, things would have been so much easier. And so there's a real joy and beauty and power in understanding when you don't know things, you don't know how hard things are going to be. You don't know all of the obstacles that are going to be put in your way, and you can be a bit more idealistic about things. So, I think back to when I co-founded my first website, I had no idea what that would turn into after 15 years, and there'd be 60, 70 full-time staff at the end of it, and I'd write a book and all that kind of stuff. It was just something at the time was like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun. Let's just start this and see what happens. And so I think now when I think about, okay, what am I going to do next? There's so many different areas I want to explore, and I know nothing about most of them. And I kind of like that, because I think there's a real sense of curiosity around some of those things where you can kind of question the way that things have been done and ask, well, why not? And sometimes when you're too close to it, you can't see those simple questions.
You don't know what to be afraid of.
Yeah. And almost every person I spoke to said that they had no idea what they were in for at the very beginning. And some of them even said, if I knew how hard it was, I wouldn't have started. So that's kind of like, yeah, you just, you don't know what you don't know. And so that's wonderful. Like I almost wish I could kind of go back to some of that naivety in starting my first business and just kind of like go, because now when you start something, you're like, oh my God, there's
all the compliance
tax
you have
problems
to do.
And the HR problems and what's this going to happen over here, what's happening over there. Whereas at the beginning, you kind of don't know any of that. You just freaking start.
Another thing you said that really resonated with me is inbox zero isn't for everyone, and I bring that up because John is a massive proponent of inbox zero, and gives me a lot of hassle for the state of my inbox, and I've never been able to stick to inbox zero. So having someone actually say inbox zero isn't for everyone, I relieved a lot of my own personal guilt.
I mean, I actually toned that down a bit after feedback from my husband. Originally, I had inbox zero is a scam. Inbox zero is a lie. And then instead I toned it down to, it's not for everyone, because I understand there are some people who like inbox zero. But my God, that was the one point, like, most of that 23 lessons thing is kind of like quite like conceptual and airy-fairy kind of thing. And that was like the one that I got the most feedback on. The most number of people said to me, thank you for like taking away some of my inbox guilt that I have felt my entire life. Because we're told that everyone should have inbox zero, and isn't this amazing, and it's zen. And like, there's days when I was, running stuff where you get 200 emails a day. I'm not going to read all of them and respond to them and file them and delete them. It's like, I'll scan them and see what's important. But the fact that like, when you use Gmail and stuff like that, the search functionality is so good.
You were the editor, so you maintained the quality of content that was released on Junkee. Can you tell us a bit about that? Does Junkee accept content from outside people, or are all people employed by you? Like, what was your model?
Yeah, so I was the publisher there and co-founder for more years than I care to remember. And we launched Junkee in 2013. 2013, sorry, we launched Junkee. I'm sure that's a very important detail, but in my head it's important. And we had a bunch of other kind of titles before then. So my job as publisher was, I was responsible for everything that we created and put out into the world. So that was all of the content that we wrote on the website, all the videos that we made, all the events that we did, all the marketing that we did, kind of everything that people saw that made up Junkee or any of our other titles kind of was my responsibility. And we had a really interesting model where we have a relatively small full-time team for the size of the audience and the size of the advertising that we get, and then a really big contributor base. So the full-time team in the end on Junkee was probably 6 full-time staff. Punky was 3 full-time staff. AWOL was 2, and a bunch of other kind of video teams. We had 4 full-time in video doing like a series on Facebook called The Junkee Takeaway. So all up, there's probably 15 to 20 kind of people in editorial. But then we had a contributor list of 50 to 100 people. And I think that's really important because we wanted to kind of make sure that the diversity of voices and opinions that we're getting was as broad as we could be. And there's only, because people had to kind of work in office in Surrey Hills, there's a particular sort of person that can live in Sydney and live in Surrey Hills. And we wanted, therefore, to make sure that our voice was as broad as it could be. So we had lots of contributors. And to this day, we're really proud of, if anyone has a really good story, you can just email the editors and pitch a story, and we love publishing, particularly new writers. I think we kind of serve a really important role in the ecosystem, that we're like a small publication compared to, Sydney Morning Herald or The Age or WA Today. So I think it's going to be important that we give ability for new writers to come in and new voices to be heard.
Before we continue this podcast, here's a message from our sponsor.
We believe that you can create art and beauty with technology. We think big. We move quietly. We are Ninja Software.
So, with the rise of fake news in the media, you brought this up in one of your notes. You said that the media itself is quite accountable to the truth. The concept of fake news is wrong. Can you talk more to that? And you're on the side of the media because you've worked, you've created Junkee. How does that fit in the landscape of all this politicizing of the news?
Yeah, I think when you see how much work goes into publishing something online, so something comes from a reputable source. So whether it's a mainstream outlet, whether it's, we consider ourselves like an old new media company. We've been around for kind of, as I said, 15, 20 years. And when you get to that level, you get called out if you publish something that's wrong, and you have standards that you need to adhere to. We as a publisher, we were getting funding from Facebook Journalism Project, from Google News Initiative, and you can't just kind of be a part of journalism and create content like that isn't fact checked, that doesn't backed up by stats or by science or anything like that. And I know, particularly the US at the moment, kind of what's happening over there with elections and with kind of Trump talking about fake news all the time. I think having seen the inside of what happens in a media organization, if we were going to publish something that was going to get us in trouble or going to be legally dubious, we would get it legaled. So we'd go to a lawyer, that would look over it before we're publishing it. And that wasn't just us, that was BuzzFeed doing the same thing. That was Vice doing the same thing. That was any of our kind of contemporaries. So I think as soon as you realize that on the inside, there is so much work that goes into publishing something before it hits someone's eyeballs. When people say fake news, or when Trump talks about, the New York Times is fake, or that's not fake, the amount of work that they need to do in order to prove something's correct before it goes online is so intricate that the concept of fake news, as Trump talks about it, is kind of bullshit. So I just think that's an interesting, fake news itself is fake in the way that it's kind of like, mainly the way that it's used.
Absolutely. Any words of advice for millennials who are starting a business, or even Gen Zers starting their businesses?
Yeah. Well, there's a great book I think they should read called Cult Status. No. So the very first thing that anyone should do, if you're thinking about starting a business, or you've got an idea, or you've got a project you want to think about, before you do anything else, before you register your domain, before you think of your business name, before you come up with a logo, the very first thing you should do is quantify on paper what it is, the impact that you want to have. So the first chapter of my book is actually called Think Impact First. And it's all about actually sit there and quantify, this is why I'm doing it. So if this is successful, this is the effect that I want it to have. And if you can do that from the start, that is going to save you so much heartache throughout the whole process. And, speaking from an older millennial who's kind of like made the mistakes along the way, that I didn't think of what that impact was at the beginning, that is something that any project I'm working on now, or any business idea I have, I'm thinking, okay, what's the actual point of this? Like, what impact do I want it to have? That will save you so much heartache.
That's good. That's good advice. All right, we won't take up too much of your time. We just have one final question, which is our whimsical question at the end of every interview. I don't know how familiar you are with wrestling, but the fighters always have their intro music. So the lights go down, the smoke starts, and they come out to their song that sets the mood for their character. What is your intro music?
What a question! Funnily enough, there's a wrestler that I always get mistaken for with my name. There's a wrestler called Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Do you guys know Hacksaw Jim Duggan? He's a big one from the 80s or 90s. And so I have some friends, in fact, who just insist on calling me Hacksaw. Even though my name is Tim Duggan, that's still close enough. I think I've got this like one thing in my head, which is just not the right answer, which is we've been traveling around regional New South Wales. Yeah, okay, I'm going to do this one. We've been traveling around regional New South Wales, and one of the places we went to, which we loved, is called Tenterfield. And it's a little town in like the central New England tablelands. And the reason why it's famous is because it's the hometown of Peter Allen, the great Australian kind of songwriter from like the 60s and 70s, who wrote a song called Tenterfield Saddler and wrote a song called I Still Call Australia Home, obviously used on all the Qantas ads. And so we've been playing a lot of Peter Allen. It's been driving around, so therefore in my head I've got Peter Allen. So maybe I'll do his most fun upbeat song, which is When My Baby Smiles at Me, I Go to Rio. You know, the When my baby smiles at me, I go to Rio.
Of course, yeah.
So maybe that's the song that comes on, and I've got some like maracas in my hand.
Nice.
And then when I get into the ring, I get the maracas and I hit someone over the head with them, and I kill them with my deadly maracas.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great answer. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Tim. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. And
awesome. Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hey.
All right.
Tim.
Thanks, gents.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.
You've made it to the end of another episode of Tech Society. On this day in tech history, November 25, 2001, scientists at Advanced Cell Technology in Massachusetts say they created the world's first cloned human embryo, which they let grow for only a few hours. Thanks for listening to today's episode. That's it from John and I. We hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure you head on over to the website and sign up to the newsletter. And don't forget to lock up when you leave.